Hi, I'm Chris Kumke from George Mason University, and you're watching Mid-Atlantic Esports Conference on Twitch.
All right, welcome everybody. I am your host, Rhea Sylvia, and right now with me I have Chris Kumke from George Mason University. Welcome, Chris.
How you doing?
Doing really well. How's your day going?
Not too bad.
That's good. That's good. These for folks watching, you've probably heard me say this before, but these interviews are pre-recorded. So I've actually had quite a few interviews today, so it's been really exciting to just keep talking to all the different folks from different schools, seeing the difference between their esports programs. And I will definitely ask you about your esports program as well. But first, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself because I understand that you actually came from a different school. So I want to hear if you were poached or like how that happened.
So yeah, first and foremost, I'm Chris Kumke. I was one of Joey's students back in the day. I was a student founder of the Shenandoah Esports program. I was the first esports graduate out there. And then I went to Independence Community College where I was the director out there for the program. And we actually won the NACE National Championship. And now I'm back at George Mason. And, I'm getting my MBA and hopefully growing this program to get better.
That's awesome. What a really cool path, because like right now actually your school gets to compete against your alma mater, and so you're probably in the front row for the trash talking or maybe in the back row actually, because you're like, I can't take sides here.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the second one. Got it.
Yeah, the second one probably. I like keeping my sides, but of course I have to root on GMU because that's where I'm at right now.
Got it. That makes sense. So talk to us. So first of all, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your MBA as well. I'm interested to hear if, your focus is, an MBA in esports or anything esports related. And regardless of whether the answer is yes or no, tell us just more also about what you do for the esports program at George Mason.
Yeah, so my MBA, I have no concentration right now, but what I love is working in the management of esports, and collegiate is kind of where I've landed right now. Like I said, I was at another program before, and now I'm at this program, and right now we're learning to expand. So basically, I came in and we had about like 80 competitive students. Now we have 145 competitive students. So we're slowly growing. We're getting better space. We're working on sponsorships. On top of that, my main job is to manage the Premier Manager. So we have a Premier Manager for 5 games: Super Smash Brothers, Valorant, Overwatch, Rocket League, and League of Legends. So my goal is to make sure everything's going smoothly there, and making sure all the competition's in, and making sure all the students are eligible.
That makes sense. How do you, for those 5 games that you just mentioned, how do you get your teams together? Do you have tryouts? Do you also have like an A team and a B team? Do you have a competitive, like a varsity team essentially, and then maybe a more, casual teams? How does it work in terms of like folks who want to participate?
So our structure is every team has their own tryouts and they can host as many teams as they want. For example, our Rocket League team has a varsity, academy, green, gold, and white. So we have up to 5 teams in certain premier games, compared to League of Legends only has 2 games. So we have tryouts in fall and in spring. So everyone's welcome to try out. And, if you make a team, you get the benefits of jerseys if you're on the top team.
That's awesome. You got to get that swag.
Yeah, 100%.
And so essentially, how do tryouts work? Just is it the past, like the outgoing team that looks at how the new people play, or like how does that work?
So right now we have coaches who are volunteer and some that are paid. And the coaches and the Premier Manager kind of work together, and we do like an internal scrimmage and sometimes external. But the teams play against each other, and at the end of the day, probably after 2 or 3 days of tryouts, we figure out who's the best team, who's going to make what team, and what needs to be happening for these teams to be successful.
Talk to me about other parts of the esports program. So obviously, to be on a competitive team, you have to be good at the game that you're competing in. But what about everything around it? Do you have any kind of specific classes or coaching or anything, let's say around like communication, right? How to give and receive feedback? Because for these team-based games, it's really important to be a good communicator. And so that's something that I think, especially college-age kids, could really use some help with.
Yeah, and I think it's all about experiential learning. It's about the communication. It's about, behind me, I have my social media booth where students can volunteer and cast. On top of that, we're hosting our first esports 101 class in spring. And that's kind of a test run of maybe making a minor from there. But on top of that, it's, getting these students the chance to work in esports. Not everyone's going to be professional, but everyone's going to have the chance to get that experiential learning of management, communication, fine motor functions, and other things. So the big thing for me is getting the students a chance to participate in any way possible.
That's great. And this is something that we talk about over and over again, but esports is really broad when you think about it. There are a lot of different fields that folks can go into, not just competing, but like you said, it could be social media, it could be on-air talent, casting, video game design, management, team management. So that's really great when schools have the capacity and I guess the funding to be able to offer all those other avenues for folks to participate in. Is there like another avenue that you're currently maybe not offering, but you're hoping to in the future that you're working towards right now?
Yeah, I think the next avenue we're kind of looking forward to is moving into more benefits for our players. As of right now, we have stuff for the social media side, and we have stuff for the editing side, and we have stuff for the premier managers, but our players specifically, we don't have too much. We have support of jerseys and some other things, but we're looking for better benefits in the future to, maybe entice better players to come out. So I think that's the future of where George Mason is going, is to incentivize, these new upcoming players to play at the highest level they can.
Tell me about your programs. What, if anything, does your program do in terms of diversity and inclusion? Because traditionally, video games and esports is a very exclusive, very gatekeepy, if that's a word, area, right? So what, if anything, does your school do to welcome more types of people into your program?
So I came in this fall, and this is the first year ever we announced we are doing an all-women's Valorant team. That's something unique that a lot of other schools are jumping into now. So we have a Patriots X team is what we call them. It's an all-women's Valorant team. On top of that, for diversity, George Mason is one of the most diverse schools in the Virginia Commonwealth. So we have opportunities, inclusion for everyone, even if it's not, if they can't compete at the highest level, they have a chance to manage, they have a chance to stream. So trying to give everyone the same opportunity or give them a chance to make their own name is big for us.
That sounds awesome. I like the idea of having an all women's team as an option, though. I hope you're not excluding women from, being on a gender mixed team.
Yeah, and all our teams are co-ed, but we did officially announce we have an all women's Valorant team, because there is that Valorant professional league where it's all women. So we decided we'll adopt that model a little bit and give them an opportunity to play with each other so they can empower each other and, hopefully build their own brands.
Absolutely. And I think that's great, because I think even for women who might end up moving on to co-ed teams, having that all women's space is a great place to dip your toe into a game that you maybe are not familiar with, because that's sort of the deterring factor is that for women, I like, as someone who like taught myself how to code, I remember like going to those like beginner coding classes and like being all men, it was a little bit toxic, because you're sort of walking in and you're not represented, you're not feeling welcome, you're not feeling supported. So I think creating sort of a safer space where women can dip their toes into it and then say like, okay, yeah, I can do this, and then maybe even move on to the co-ed teams.
100% agree, and that's where we have we also are doing events like a Women in Esports event, and it's not even just people who play the esports games, but it's all video games where they can, mingle together and hopefully get a more or less toxic environment. So they can hang out and, figure out, is this something I want to jump into? Is this a safe space for me? And stuff like that, because esports in general is very inclusive. You don't have to be 6'5" and a big athlete. You can be anyone. You could be someone in a wheelchair. You can be, someone with a speech impediment, and you have every opportunity to compete at the highest level that everyone else does. And that's something awesome about esports that you won't see anywhere else.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. I love that analogy, and I love that. Well, not the analogy, but I love that you bring that up. And the analogy that I like to use is like, I can't play basketball with Michael Jordan, but I can play League of Legends with Michael Jordan.
Of course. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I like that. I like that a lot. And I like what you brought up about the event, that for women, where it's about games and it's not necessarily about esports, because I think a lot of women also might get into games that are maybe a little more casual, or even like phone games, and that's still gaming, right? But because it's kind of looked down upon, it might not be included in these esports programs. So again, you're actually creating an avenue and a space where women can dip their toe into gaming or esports and see if it's for them.
Yeah, and that's the crazy part. It's like, if you look at the statistics, it's about like 57% are male gamers, but then then women are about like 43%. But like when you go to esports, it's like an 80-20 split, maybe even more. And don't quote me on those numbers, but it's somewhere around there. I'm a little bit rusty on my numbers. But yeah, it's kind of crazy how there's that big dip from gaming to esports.
That's awesome that your program kind of looks at, hey, like you're thinking outside the box, right? Like you're like, hey, what can we do to make this more appealing to different demographics? I like that. So tell us a little bit about your competitive teams, right? So competing in the MAEC, maybe you're competing in other leagues. How are they doing?
Yeah, so right now, I think all our teams are tied for first in MAEC. And then the other leagues, I think we're basically out. We're competing at, in NACE, I think we're top 16 in the East. In Valorant, we were top 16 in the East. And we're competing in, those publisher games. But on top of that, we're in NACE and MAEC. And MAEC, we're doing pretty well right now. Like I said, I think number 1 seed or tied for number 1 seed in almost every game. And I think Rocket League is the only one we're in second place. But other than that, it seems like we're going to be super competitive, and we're looking forward to the LAN at Shenandoah.
It's definitely going to be really exciting. I'm looking forward to it as well. MAC is always just such a pleasure to watch. I think what makes it different, at least from my point of view, like as someone who gets to talk to the directors and the head coaches, is the collegiality, right? Like everyone's just so nice, which is surprising for esports, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but like that's what I really like. Like, I mean, obviously there is a little bit of trash talk, that's the thing about sports, but at the end of the day, there is a high level of sportsmanship in the MAEC, and I think it definitely sets it apart.
100%. I think MAEC, it's awesome to have the local competition where you can compete against like Shenandoah, ODU, the more local schools, instead of you're competing against, University of Florida. And it gives all these schools an opportunity to meet up with each other, to hang out, and to build, those rivalries. And on top of that, a chance to have in-person games, because it's only a 2-hour drive instead of a, 8-hour, flight to, Kansas or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Flying to California from the East Coast is a pain. That's one I always think about. I'm like, oh God, that's a long flight. Plus road trips are fun. So
sometimes they are, 100%.
Sometimes. It's very diplomatic answer.
Depends who you're riding with, of course,
Yes, that is very true. So looking ahead, what's next for George Mason in terms of its esports program? I know you said that you're looking at maybe doing an esports minor. Is there anything else, like any kind of like maybe events or groups that you would like to create? Of course, given the funding and the human resources.
So something we do every year is called Game Mason. Game Mason is more than just esports. It's graphic designing and, music and arts and gaming and stuff like that. I think during the COVID year, we had around 600 people. We're trying to expand to 1,000, but each one of our premier games is going to have like a LAN event, a LAN tournament of four schools from each premier game are going to come here and compete for a prize pool. So that's something big that's coming up. We invite everyone. We have keynote speakers who come out and kind of speak and talk about esports for all these, people who aren't in esports to learn about it and who aren't in gaming and who aren't in art, but they get a chance to actually experience what gaming is. I think there might be a cosplay competition, which is something unique. So that is something that is coming out to George Mason. On top of that, we have, I think we just worked on it, we had a World's Watch Party and we partnered with Nova. We had about 80 people come out and we bought pizza, hang out. So it's big about getting the community involved of George Mason. On top of that, the community outside of George Mason.
Oh my gosh, I love both of those. Now, when you say Worlds, do you mean League of Legends Worlds that just happened? That's awesome. That's amazing. Like having a big pizza party to watch that sounds like a great time. And Game Mason sounds like your very own convention. It actually sounds incredibly fun. When does that happen? Like what is that like what month does that happen every year?
It's March 3rd and 4th this year, but it's around, early spring, March time. And it's something amazing. It's something I haven't got experience, but I've been told stories a lot about how exciting it is. And it's kind of that one big thing to look forward to.
That's amazing. I'm going to put it on my calendar right now.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, Chris, I want to switch gears here just a little bit because, with all the folks that we are interviewing here for this event, I also sort of behind the scenes asked them if there's any interesting personal projects they're working on, like writing a book or, training for a marathon. And Chris actually had a very interesting story that I want to hear about. So, Chris, what is it that you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I'm kind of getting into pickleball. It's a unique sport that's kind of blowing up recently. Mm-hmm. Tom Brady's buying, like a franchise in it. And it's something I'm getting into. It's kind of like a mix of ping pong and tennis. It's something that gets my mind off, sitting at a computer screen for a long time. And it gives me a chance to, hang out outside, make new friends, stuff like that. So pickleball is kind of my new journey of what I am diving into.
I love it. I haven't heard of pickleball until a few months ago, and it does seem to be blowing up. Like I'm literally reading just news articles about how oh wow, it's one of the fastest growing sports or interests in the US. And I love what you mentioned about getting outside, because that is also something that we talk a lot about at Game Jam and at our MAC events is a healthy life balance, because being a good esports athlete isn't just about training for that specific game. It's also, treating your body like an athlete, which means eating well, going outside, getting exercise. So I think that's an amazing example that you set for your students in your program that hey, I love video games, I'm going to sit down and play a lot, but I'm also going to go outside and I'm going to play pickleball.
100%. That's where I have my team leadership, and we can go out once in a while and play a sport, or our Rocket League team's doing intramurals together, intramural soccer. It's just something, it's you can't be at the best level if you're not, producing all those hormones and stuff like that and getting out. And, if you look at the professional esports athlete, most of them are fit. It's because, they're at their top notch, and you can't perform at the highest level if you're mentally and physically not in the game.
Absolutely. All right, well, we just have a couple minutes left here. Chris, do you have any words of encouragement for your teams as they compete right now? And by right now, I mean, obviously we're pre-recording this, but right now as this airs, do you have any words of encouragement for them?
I think they're just super excited. Sometimes it's their first LAN event. So, just stay focused, get ready for it, and prepare for the future. This might not be your year, but next year you have it. So having the teams go out, compete at the highest level they can, and hopefully beat everyone else, not to knock Shenandoah, but hopefully we can beat them, because that is a rivalry that I kind of wanted to see George Mason beat Shenandoah, because it's some of my old friends that I used to compete with. So it'd be fun to see them kind of get knocked down. But overall, hopefully the team competes well, and, I'm there if they need anything.
Sounds great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us here today and taking your time and sharing your expertise and also a little bit of information about the esports program at your school. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Awesome. You too.